Welcome to the Applied Blockchain podcast, where blockchain technology and innovation are in the spotlight. My name is Adi Ben-Ari, and I'm the founder and CEO of Applied Blockchain, and I'll be your host as we dive into relaxed conversations with industry experts and thought leaders to get their views on what they're building, the Web3 ecosystem and its transformative impact on the modern world. Daniela Barbosa, welcome to the Applied Blockchain podcast.
Hi, Adi. It's great to be here. I'm so excited to have our conversation today. We've known each other for many, many years, so it's always great to reconnect.
We have, good. You're a different type of guest for me, so I'm hoping for I think we can have a really interesting conversation. So first of all, Daniela, tell me a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get into all this? You know, you're in this role of GM of Hyperledger Foundation. So what's the background?
Yeah, well, let's start, what my role is today. So I am the general manager for blockchain and identity projects across the Linux Foundation. And the Linux Foundation for the last 30 years has been the home for what I would say the most important open source projects, obviously the Linux kernel itself, but really across all different industries, from cloud computing with Kubernetes and the Cloud Native Foundation, automotive, even the film industry. So Academy Software Foundation is where the film industry comes together to work on open source together code projects. And I think it's really important to understand the Linux Foundation as a whole being the place where enterprises and governments and individuals come together to collaborate on this. My background is, has been, an interesting cycle of where I got to today. I actually have a graduate degree in information library science. And the reason I went to library school, at the time it was called, was more on the information side. I love library, I love books. I love the fact that books, hold history for us and the access of libraries. But I was very interested in making sure that, this was the early 90s where I saw the internet going and I saw the opportunities for information and for knowledge on the internet, that it was, my focus was everybody had to have access to this information. So I've always come to technology really about, making sure that society and everyone has access to it. I went to work for a large company called Dow Jones at the time, which was the data side of the business, the financial data side of the business, in 1999. And I stayed with Dow Jones for many years, moved to San Francisco with Dow Jones, always, very focused on information, on taxonomies, on ontologies, on just information management. And when I moved to San Francisco, started getting very involved in what at the time was the digital identity community, which was really working on Web 2, right? So the federated logins into systems like MySpace and then Facebook and, Twitter. And I got involved in the technology community in San Francisco, which then led me to, get involved also in the blockchain communities. Back then it was only Bitcoin, Ethereum came along. And I was always very fascinated with the blockchain technology also from an inclusion perspective of being able, just like I was in, information science and library about making sure that everybody had access to knowledge and information, that the blockchain technology was going to bring that financial inclusion to the world, and independence of it. Obviously, I was always just very interested in the enterprise play in the sense of how do we make these technologies enterprise grade, making sure that people have access to it. So in 2016, when the Linux Foundation formed what is now known as Hyperledger Foundation, the project, I was like, oh, wait a minute, there's people working on blockchain that are coming from that enterprise space, really looking to build a community openly around the governance of this code. And that's how I got involved. And since then, obviously, Hyperledger as the project has really evolved and our ecosystem continues to expand. And we're really excited about where we are today and where we're headed.
Yeah, amazing. Super interesting. I like the open access to information and then and obviously blockchain and identity. It's you've got a few threads. It's interesting how everybody comes into the space from a different angle, and kind of tying different things together. I guess I'll kind of give you my perspective a bit, looking at it from the side. I remember when the foundation first started, because I was working at Lloyd's Bank at the time. And I remember we did a hackathon with IBM, and people were sort of playing with Ethereum when it first came out. And then the foundation was set up, and I think IBM was, I don't know if it was the first big project, but it was certainly one of the first ones that went in, Fabric. And I think the name also came from, I think it was Digital Asset had acquired a startup, and then the Hyperledger name went in with it, or something like that.
That is correct. Yeah.
It's a bit of a sort of trivia history.
Yeah, so it was 2015 and 23 different companies came together to form what was then known the Hyperledger project. And Hyperledger Fabric was the first project that came in, which was a contribution, as you said, by IBM. And at the time you had SAP, you had, JP Morgan, you had Lloyd's, like you had very large banks participating in that community as well. Shortly after was the second contribution, which came from Intel, which was a project called Sawtooth at the time, Hyperledger Sawtooth, that has since been archived. And then year after year, the community continued to grow based on the needs of the enterprise users that were, looking at blockchain. And then in 2017, digital identity, our digital identity projects started with Hyperledger Indy, and then up to 2019. Well, actually, in 2017, we had our first Ethereum project, which you probably remember, which was called Burrow, Hyperledger Burrow.
Yeah, this was originally, was it Eris? I think it was called Eris even right at the beginning. This was the first enterprise. I think these were the first people who took Ethereum and said, we're going to do an enterprise version of it, something like that.
Right. And then in 2019, obviously, Besu got contributed by Consensus.
Yeah.
So, our community has always been very open to not just, permission distributed ledgers, but the ecosystem as a whole, especially in the Ethereum ecosystem very early on, participating, the Ethereum Foundation, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, by 2018, the community was already, working, to shared goals basically around, these ecosystems, and we continue to do so.
Yeah, amazing. I think, like, again, looking at it from the side, there kind of became this breadth of projects, right? Like you said, there were projects around identity and around zero knowledge and a whole lot of different sort of areas adjacent to the blockchains as well as the different blockchains themselves. How do you describe the evolutions since then?
So there's a couple of things, right? One is, certainly ledgers and blockchains are a key piece to a lot of this infrastructure that's being built out, but it starts to expand out, right? It is really, what we call decentralized technologies. There are blockchains, there's smart contracts, right? There's decentralized identity systems. There is, ZKPs, right? Zero knowledge proof projects. There's, really a lot of technology that fits into this decentralized, technology ecosystem. And, many of them require different things, right? You have to have smart contracts or you can run chain code. And there's optionalities that we believe here at the foundation are really critical to how the ecosystem grows, right? If you dictate this is the only way that's going to be done, and these are the only things that we're going to work within our community, sometimes, that strategy and the approach works really well for certain technologies. And perhaps in the beginning, in 2016 and 2017, when the community started getting together and saying, hey, this blockchain thing is a thing that's going to bring efficiencies to our market, right? Are going, it's going to be able to enable us to open up new markets. That made sense. But as the ecosystem continues to mature, it's being just having optionality, and choices. But very importantly, and what we do at the Linux Foundation, is have these communities all work under the same open governance and open development principles, which is really core to what we do, right? We are an open source community. You might know us for projects and different announcements and different community members. But at the core of what we do, it is about creating a community of developers and the end users, the companies that are using these code bases that are working in the open under open governance principles. And I think it's really important, as we think about, financial infrastructure that's being built today, that, open source and open development is, really critical to the industry getting it right.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Daniel, what's kind of the criteria for getting a project into the foundation? I mean, if I have a small open source project, could I submit it, or what? How does it work?
Yeah, so it's really, there's a couple of things that make operating an open source easy, right? And it should be easy for developers and for companies who want to create open source projects to work collaboratively. And once again, that's what we bring into the Linux Foundation is kind of the frameworks for doing that. The communities, you can just basically step into a community and say, hey, I have an idea. Very often, a lot of these projects are built collaboratively at our events. So I'll give you an example. We have one project called Hyperledger Cacti, which was called Cactus and now it's Cacti. And that's an interoperability project. And that was actually a project that the developers in our ecosystem in 2019 got together together at our meetups and our different events and said, hey, we're all working on interoperability. Wouldn't it be great if we do it together, right? And that's one way, what we call community organic development of code projects. Very often, though, however, we also have companies, right, and other communities that have code projects, and they say, hey, this is interesting. We want to open this up, right, so that from a governance perspective, anyone can contribute. And we want to expand the contributions, right? We don't want just it to be one company that is contributing to this code base. We want to open this up so that many people feel comfortable. And, if a developer wants to contribute to a project, they certainly can, even if it's a project that's open source under a company's GitHub. But many companies and organizations don't like to do that, right? They want to make sure that when they do it to an open source community. So for us, there's two different approaches. We have a very active labs. Today it's called Hyperledger Labs. In the labs ecosystem, you can bring in a code base as long as it's pretty aligned to what the mission of the foundation is. And the lab stewards look at the proposal, make sure that it's essentially from, a proposal perspective is set up, and then it gets approved. Once those code projects go into labs, then you can take advantage of a lot of the community resources that we have, things like, having a meetup to talk about the code project that you have, getting introductions to other developers in the ecosystem that might be working together. So labs is one, what we call very lightweight approach to bringing code into the foundation. Others are, for established projects, they come in, they go through a proposal process. The technical oversight committee, which is a governance body of the foundation that is elected by the maintainers of the projects. So every year, the technical oversight committee gets elected by the maintainers. All right, it is not a pay-for-play. People who participate, we call it a do-ocracy. Those who do get to move things forward the most. Yes. So you can also come in as a project proposal. And if you look at the project proposals over the last few years, today we have 14 different projects in the foundation umbrella. They're becoming more and more diverse because, once again, the technologies are expanding in how they're being, deployed and used as well in these systems. So it's very lightweight from labs to a very, project lifecycle set proposal process as well.
I guess one of the challenges, we as a company, Applied Blockchain, we work in the public blockchain space as well as the private blockchains and the enterprise side. I guess on the public side, there's a tremendous amount. It's like the Wild West, right? There's all this innovation, there's all these projects, and they move very, very quickly, and they, some of them rise and fall and crash and burn and whatever, but things move very quickly. Mm-hmm. I guess in the enterprise space, things naturally, these are big organizations, more risk averse and so on. Things naturally move more slowly. How do you think the enterprises can deal with that? Because I guess the Linux Foundation it could be like one of the routes to open source, an open source ecosystem, developers, and so on. Do you have a view on this? How you sort of reconcile these two?
Sure. I think there's innovation in both. There's innovation in both communities, and I would say over the last 5 to 6 years, the communities, the public communities and the permissioned communities, are actually coming, much, much more together. And, you just take a look at some of the work that's happening in, the layer ones and layer twos in regards to things like, subnets, right? They're trying to basically make sure that the technology is able to meet the needs of enterprise deployments, whether it's in financial services, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in any other industry as well. So we've always been of the opinion, since, early, hence the Hyperledger Besu contribution in 2019, that, the enterprises actually want the optionality, and they want to be able to innovate on both permissionless and permissioned use cases as well. So I don't think there's ever, there's no longer a question that that's the case. So for us, it's actually been an opportunity to bring those communities into what our community has, right? Mm-hmm. So that if people in the completely permissionless space, right. So, Hyperledger Besu today runs, 14 to 15% of mainnet as an execution client.
Yeah, this is it. Not many people know that Besu is an Ethereum client that runs both in the public Ethereum chain and can be run privately, right?
Exactly, exactly. And that number just continues to grow, and the support of Besu as an execution client continues to grow. And then there's some great projects out there that are using Besu, for example, to build layer ones, like national project layer ones, like FC, the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure in Europe, LatChain under the International American Development Bank in Latin America, the Brazilian Development Bank, and then obviously things like CBDC, central bank digital currencies, love them or hate them. A lot of those are also looking to make sure that they have that long-term optionality for the Ethereum mainnet. But we even have other projects in our community that utilize either our code projects or already bringing code projects in. For example, a couple of weeks ago, we announced Identus, which is coming from the Atala Prism ecosystem, which is part of the Cardano blockchain ecosystem. We have projects like Web3.js, which is an integration library to the Ethereum, which I know you're very familiar with as well. Solang, which is a Solidity compiler for Substrate. People are like, why is that in Hyperledger? Why is that under Linux Foundation? Because that's what enterprises are looking for. So I don't think the dichotomy maybe in 2015, 2016, 2017 it was very much if you want to work on permission blockchain, you do it here, and if you want to work on public permissionless use cases, you do it there. Today, that's no longer the case. And one of the things that we're very excited about, which we announced a couple of weeks ago, is the Hyperledger Foundation is actually expanding into a greater umbrella at the Linux Foundation. It's going to be called LF Decentralized Trust. Under LF Decentralized Trust are going to be all the current Hyperledger projects, including the ones I just mentioned, and additional projects that are coming from layer one ecosystems into our foundation because they want to work collaboratively under that umbrella. And I think it's really indicative of what our community has been building over the last 8 years because we're able to bring in the enterprises. We're able to bring in the big banks, right? We're able to bring in the big pharmaceutical companies to collaborate together.
So what does this mean? Does this mean layer ones sort of releasing their software within and also developing their software within the Linux Foundation under this umbrella, under this sort of expanded umbrella?
Yes. So, that is really, we truly believe that, and we've shown this in our ecosystem with projects like Hyperledger Fabric and Besu, that developers, enterprise developers particularly, and when I mean enterprise developers, I mean people who are working to build enterprise grade systems, right? It's not necessarily they have to go, be working at a big bank. It could be, a B2C company. It could be, a government, right? A government institution.
We have this, right? Most of our clients, if they're not enterprises, they're companies that are selling to enterprises or building with a view that there'll be enterprise usage or it needs to be enterprise grade, right?
Yeah. And, a lot of government institutions and stuff. And we truly believe that by working together under an umbrella, even though making choices and some of the choices are, it's very much about community driven. Like, well, I'm always going to use X project and I'm always going to use X project. But there's core things that we can work on collaboratively to build these ecosystems and allow them to expand back out, right? And if your developer, understands how to work with Besu, for example, and also understands how to work with Fabric or how to work with Indie, right? They understand that it's all still under the same governance, right? The governance of the code is the same. So one of the things, for example, we've been doing over the last few years is working very closely with the central banks, right? With the public sector, for example, around how do they use blockchain technology, specifically DLT technology. And one of the things they feel very comfortable about is, hey, these projects are all under the Linux Foundation. We understand the governance principles of these code projects. And now we just have to decide which code project meets the needs that we have, right? And this is the same for private sector as well. And, being under that umbrella, I think is really, beneficial to developers and ecosystems to cross-pollinate some of the innovation that's happening across these systems. So, to answer your question very succinctly, yes, you will see layer one open source projects coming under LF Decentralized Trust, so the new super umbrella where decentralized technologies are going to be worked on under the Linux Foundation.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. It's gonna be a lot more. There'll be a lot more going on as well, I guess.
Yeah.
And again, just out of curiosity, also trying to understand a bit more about this from a funding perspective. It's not a funding. It's not an organization that funds the projects, right? The projects have to fund themselves. It's more about governance and the governance around the open source, right?
So the way that all the Linux Foundation projects, including today's Hyperledger Foundation and, soon to be, we're launching in the fall, the LF Decentralized Trust, the funding comes from the members. So members join the foundation to help fund the work that the foundation does. And pretty much every penny that comes in from a membership perspective goes right back to the developers and, the community that we sponsor. This is making sure that the tooling is correct, right? So that developers have access to the tooling that they need, making sure that they have access to resources like meetups and webinars and things that help them talk about the projects that they have. We spend a lot of time and resources making sure that training and education, right? Because if these technologies are to be adopted long term, they need to have training and education and certification. So we have certification courses. So for example, in the fall, we'll be launching our Besu professional certification. You can hire developers that are Besu certified. You become a developer that are Besu certified. And then you can hire firms that are certified in these technologies as well. And we already have those for Hyperledger Fabric, for example, as well. So the importance of, funding those kind of things so that the community continues to work towards having the code be enterprise ready, right, and enterprise grade as well. So I always talk about the three pillars. The pillar number one is our developer ecosystem and the funding that is needed to keep those projects, making sure that they have the resources that they need, the education and training that we bring to the communities once these projects are mature. And the third part is having a healthy commercial ecosystem, right, making sure that companies are coming on board to help support the products and services. Very often these technologies are used by what I would call end user companies that are partnering. They might be partnering with Applied Blockchain, right? They might be buying products and services that are built using the open source code bases. They might be doing pure services on the products and services that we have. So having that commercial ecosystem is really powerful. But the funding comes from the members.
Yep.
And the members are then the annual membership fees then get applied to building the community resources that the developers need.
Yeah. Okay, very good, very good. I mean, we just joined, and obviously we're starting to sort of understand more about this and the projects there and so on. Previously, we actually joined another Linux Foundation organization, which was a confidential computing consortium. So we had a great experience there with some of the technology and projects being developed, I guess, in that space, which we also operate in. So yeah,
right. And we think, we thank you for your, for Applied Blockchain's support in the ecosystem because, ultimately it is about what you put in, right? To, the more that you get out as well. But in essence, having a space where companies can come and help support the maintainers that are building the code that you are then using for your products and services. But very importantly also is making sure that companies have a voice in the community. So we do, where in the code communities, it's always open. You never have to be a member to participate. You never have to be a member to use the code, to contribute to the code, and to participate in any of our communities, whether it's a working group or it is the code projects themselves. We do, however, work very closely with our members to have member type of events. So we have, for example, our annual member summit. This year, the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, member summit is going to happen in San Francisco. It'll be the first convening of all our members together. It'll happen in October. And this is a place for members to come together under Chatham House rules to talk about what they need in the ecosystem, what they need from an industry perspective. Out of these member events, and we do them quarterly as well, is having virtual quarterly events and convenings is where the members really get together and, form partnerships, right? So a lot of partnerships have been formed in these member events, and to, come together and say, here's something that is needed. I'll give you an example. Last year in our member summit, the community got together and started thinking through what specifically for Besu was needed from financial services perspective. So one of the outcomes of our member discussions were additional workshops that we did for financial services for the banks themselves, and also the Besu for Financial Services Working Group, which we launched a couple of months ago. And you basically have a lot of the banks involved in this, not just member banks, but everyone to come in and convene. But that was done by our members first, right? And they came together and said, this is something that we do. Today, that's chaired by DTCC. They actually ran some of the convening meetings at our member summit last year. And today, is a great opportunity for the banks to get together. And that working group is open. Once again, you don't have to be a member to participate, but the members really contribute to the strategy and kind of where we're going to focus on a year, 2 years, 3 years as well.
Yeah. Excellent, very good.
We're looking forward to seeing you in September.
Oh,
October.
We've already been tuning into some of these and watching the previous ones, so we're catching up.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity.
So Daniela, from where you're sitting, what does the future look like? Like, what are where are we going with this? What are we not seeing yet?
Well, I think a couple of things. And I was just at Point Zero in Zurich. I think you guys were there as well. And this discussion keeps, coming up where, especially in financial services, the move away from just doing R&D and proof of concepts and going into production implementations. So specifically around topics of tokenization. So we're seeing a lot of these projects interoperability, the concept of, FinInternet, and global layers, right? These are a lot of the projects that our community, the Hyperledger community today and the LF decentralized community is already working on and is part of. So I think you'll see continued adoption of this, but it is still a long game. People ask me all the time, hey, when are people, and maybe you tell me, right? It is not something that's happening very quickly. In my personal opinion, is it shouldn't happen very quickly. We're talking about rebuilding financial infrastructure, for example, and we want to make sure that this gets done. We're talking about rebuilding digital identity or building out decentralized identity systems that are going to be, part of infrastructure for the rest of our lives and our children's lives, and their children's lives that we want to make sure we get right. So I think that the long game, just like in any transformational technology, it's not something that happens overnight. It's very exciting, the innovation that happens in the public, blockchain ecosystem, because it can move much faster. But when you need to apply that technology into established systems, it's just going to take a bit longer, right? You need to have regulations. One of the things we see outside of finance is the regulations that are happening that are driving the use of decentralized technologies, right? Because of requirements around, forced labor, for example, when it comes to supply chain and traceability, right? When it's coming to, sustainability regulation, and people are like, wait a minute, there's a perfectly built technology that actually mixes, matches that.
Yeah,
it becomes much easier.
Regulation can put the brakes on things, but regulation can also really accelerate as well. Like when you have to do it, you're going to, you've got no choice.
Exactly. Like how do you go about, So I think it's a mixed bag at all times. But I do think that what we're seeing in, financial services, things moving out of the R&D office and the innovation office and moving into productions. I mean, I know of digital, banks that have digital assets teams that are now in the hundreds of people working on digital asset projects. And, and some of it is crypto related, right? They're building, products and services, specifically that are crypto based. And a lot of it is how do you actually use digital assets, to move value around, which could be public and permissioned as well, or a combination, right? Which is we're also seeing a lot of these hybrid use cases, in the marketplace. So, I'm feeling positive. I think the market as a whole is feeling positive. And, I always say there's going to be much more, big failures, right? There will be another FTX type of event where everyone kind of goes, ooh, now we don't talk about blockchain anymore. Or we don't talk about crypto anymore. But I do think that, I'm feeling positive about it.
Very good. I think I echo that. As a techie, sort of again, looking at it from a slightly different perspective, I look at the technology, and I also came from an enterprise background, and I can just see how it works, right? And how identity can be different, and how transactions that we have can be very efficient, and so on. So you can kind of see the answer there, but actually working it through to reality across different business spaces and different industries, that's a whole different ballgame. And I think it happens in waves. So this kind of innovation happens in waves, right? You kind of get, someone does something, someone else sees that, my competitor's doing it, and so on. And then it all goes a bit too far and then has to consolidate. And then again, so we've seen these different waves in the enterprise space as well. And now we're seeing, as you say, more focus on tokenization. The projects that we're involved in are also around supply chain and around healthcare and track and trace and sustainability, as you say, and these kind of things. So this is what we're seeing, but for me, it is a long game, especially in financial services where you have to face into regulation, and the regulation has to hopefully adapt as well. it's good to have an organization that's a constant through that. Because you have the different players that come and go, or that, like FTX will explode or implode, and obviously different technologies that get tried. But it's good to have a sort of common thread of an organization that's kind of there throughout, and sort of seeing the technologies come in and out and adapt and so on.
Yeah. And that's really what the Linux Foundation has been doing, right, for the last 30 years. But if you look at the last 10 and 12 years around very specific technology stacks. So, for example, LF networking, which is a super umbrella in the telecommunications space, right? There was a lot of experimentation, going on very early on. And today, I think it's like 75% of the telecoms are using open source, stack that basically is sitting under LF networking, which is a combination of multiple projects being put together, because the industry was like, okay, we're getting more mature. We can start working on these things, and we should work on these things, collaboratively. Same thing with LF data and AI, and LF energy, right? These are industries that understand that as these projects mature, it is better to work collaboratively under and kind of push the ecosystem and the industry forward together. And so that's why I'm really excited about LF Decentralized Trust, because it's going to create that kind of umbrella structure that people under a trusted brand can come and bring their code projects into, and the ones that are already here can continue to grow and mature to being market leaders as well. I think one of the things, very importantly around the term blockchain and as a technology is that we're getting to a point where, people don't show up and say, hey, let me sell you my blockchain solution, right? These technologies become core to the technology infrastructure that people are building on, right? And you no longer, I'll tell you, in 2017, when I started at Hyperledger, we did get calls from people that would say, I just walked out of my C-level board meeting, and they said, go do something in blockchain. And I remember being like, no, please don't start the conversation with that. Like, no, what is it that you're trying to fix? Like, what is the thing that you're trying to do? And we've come a long way, baby, from there. It's essentially where we've had, where the discussion is very different. It's not just about, well, I have to have a blockchain, or, blockchain is going to do this, but what is the technology actually going to bring into the market? And people don't, there's lots of companies out there that are using blockchain and using even specifically Hyperledger projects, that actually do not, if you go on their website, if you hear their pitch, if you see, after raising many, many rounds of a lot of VC money, the blockchain message is actually in the background, right? Yep. The technology is helping them bring value to their customers and to their market without actually having to talk about blockchain. So it's always, people are like, oh, is blockchain dead? No, it's not dead. It's still very alive.
No, I mean, there's the hype cycle. Like you said, there was a period when it was, my competitor's doing it, so I've got to do it. There was also a period where if I want to raise money, I've got to have blockchain in there somewhere. So we had all these startups coming to us trying to bring it in. And then as a company, we've always looked at this long term. And if we're going to have a customer that we're going to have a long term relationship with, there's got to be value in there long term for this technology and for them to use the technology. So it's kind of got to make sense. And there's also a lot of nuances in there. So just because you're using blockchain doesn't mean you're going to get the value that you might associate with blockchain, right? It's got to be set up in a certain way. You've got to be doing certain things with it and so on. So there's a fair amount of kind of detail.
And there's a range, right? You can go 100%, or you can, the value point there. I mean, the bottom line is that technologies are understood better, right? So the industry as a whole understands why blockchain, why smart contracts, right? Why, it's a different period of time when people get involved in these technologies. They don't just come for the PR, essentially. Which is important.
Great. Daniela, one last question that I ask all our guests. Do you have a book or some source of information? It could be maybe another podcast or something that you really enjoy that you'd recommend to others?
So I have lots. I spend the majority of my time looking at podcasts, listening to podcasts, reading books in the industry. So there's a lot of stuff out there as well. So a couple of ones that I really rely on. One is Money Reimagined. So this is with Sheila Warren. She's the Crypto Council. She's the CEO for the Crypto Council for Innovation. She was head of blockchain at the WEF for many years. So it's Sheila Warren and Michael Casey, who was at CoinDesk at the time. And I always feel like their podcasts are like a couple months ahead of the industry in regards to the things that they're talking about. So, they have an insider listener's view. And then I'm still old school. Like I like things like Unchained with Laura Chin. In the digital identity space, there's a podcast called SSI Orbit. By Matthew Gaudu. Also excellent, sometimes a little bit technical and in depth, but an excellent around decentralized identity podcast. And then, for reading, I think one of the best in the industry from a news perspective is Ledger Insights. And Ledger Insights really covers the, enterprise blockchain industry. And once again, enterprise blockchain is not a permission blockchain thing. It really is about, the different, options that enterprises have access to, but they really do a great coverage of what's happening in the ecosystem on a day-to-day basis. And then, I always have in my ears, a podcast or, one of our Hyperledger YouTube, chapters, our meetups, our, special interest groups, our different communities. There's anywhere from 5 to 8 events that we publish on YouTube, and I like to listen to all of them so I can hear. So I listen to everything at 1.5 speed. That's probably why I talk very fast too.
and also you attend a lot of events, right? You present at a lot of events as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We participate in a lot of industry events and industry in the blockchain industry, in the decentralized identity industry, and then just in general, financial services, healthcare. This is really important to have a voice and hear what people are saying, in those industry, conferences as well.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Daniela, thank you very much.
And of course, all the newsletters and all the things that Applied Blockchain comes out. You guys are on my list as well.
Very good. I'd be curious to have another conversation, in I don't know, a year or two or something. The industry moves so much. It would be interesting to see where we are. Thank you for listening to the Applied Blockchain podcast. Make sure you follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, please let us know by leaving a review and clicking subscribe. Until next time.